Hi, this is our first video in our new GDST elective on visual learning of philosophy. And I'm very excited to introduce Julian Plumley, who's CEO of Endoxa Learning, who have developed this new app for visual learning. So first of all, Julian, thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed and for agreeing to show us through how to use this app.
Hi, Alexis. Thanks for inviting me to this. Yes, we've just introduced this app. We've been going for about a month so far. The purpose of it is visual learning of argument. So for subjects like philosophy, this is really useful. And visual learning is great for being able to grasp arguments and being able to remember them. So we can have a look at an example in a sec.
Thank you. And is this a brand new initiative, Julian? Why have you done this?
Well, I've done it because basically my own experience. A while back I did a degree in philosophy, and when I was revising, all of my revision notes looked like diagrams. They look like pictures, and I thought this was a great idea. So I researched it. There's a lot of research on this area, but there was no real product. So I've turned it into a product, and we've been developing it for the last about a year or so.
Excellent. Well, Julian, I'm excited to go through this with you, so I'm going to hand over to you.
Right, so I'm going to share the screen. So let's do that. Have you come off the grid?
I've come off grid view this time.
Right. Okay, can you see this, the front page?
Yep, I can see the welcome page and it says pick a subject to start.
Great, okay, well this is the front page of the app. These are all A-level subjects that you can choose from. And there's some training material here. And today we're actually going to look at a very philosophical argument that is part of business studies. So I'm going to click on business studies. And the subject is corporate social responsibility. That's when companies do things that are good for society rather than good for their profits. And we're going to have a look at Milton Friedman's argument that is against corporate social responsibility.
So Julian, that's quite shocking to have an argument against corporate social responsibility.
This was very controversial, and Friedman, he's very famous. He's a Nobel Prize winner, and his thinking actually drove the way that business schools have been teaching from the 1970s onward for decades, actually. But in recent years, it's been more and more criticized. But what we're going to do here is look actually what he said and what his argument was. Even if you want to argue against it, you do need to know what the argument is that you are arguing against.
And Julian, where do I start on this page?
So this is the app itself. This is the first stage of a lesson. All the lessons come in stages. You can see the numbers of the stages at the bottom. So this is 1 to 12 in this case. The argument is going to appear here in the center. And you start off actually with some instructions and introduction on the first stage. So this little character down here is called Doxa, and Doxa is our assistant, and Doxa will explain what the lesson is about. So in this case, there's a little definition of corporate social responsibility, CSR, and a little introduction of Milton Friedman himself, and where you can find this argument.
Excellent, excellent. And I take it that I'm pressing the next button when I'm using this.
Yeah, so I'm going to press the next button, and we'll go to the first step of the argument.
Great. Now that looks straightforward, but I'm not sure where to start.
Okay, so arguments are presented as diagrams. This is a kind of flow sheet. And each step of the argument, this is one step, and it moves from statements that are its premises to its conclusion. So in this case, this is not a very controversial step. It just says contracts establish duties.
Yeah.
A manager of a business has a contract with an owner to run the business.
Yeah.
So therefore, the manager has a duty to run the business according to the owner's wishes. This is kind of obvious, but it's where Friedman begins.
Lovely. And there's a purple classification box in the center. What's that?
This is an argument type. What we've done in this app is we've taken argumentation theory, which is quite complex, and we've simplified it down to, we have a menu of 15 argument types. And each step of an argument is given one of these types. And this helps you think about the argument because you know what kind of reasoning is going on.
Yeah. So is it possible that students might recognize these types of arguments but not realize what their classification is?
Yes. Classification is standing in for various kinds of syllogism. Probably you need to have studied logic to know what that is, but some of them are very much more obvious. Excuse me. So as we go through, we'll see different argument types, and some of them are very everyday ideas. Some of them you need to have a look at more carefully.
Yeah.
If I click on the question mark for any of the argument types, it'll bring up a box giving more information. So
great. Useful.
It'll give the argument step in words. So those are the kind of words you'd use in an essay. And it'll give you what are called critical questions. These are the ways you could think about the argument to try and support it or to try and undermine it. And there's also a video. Each type has a video that will explain that argument type.
Excellent, thank you. And what do we do next?
Well, the first thing is not to worry about the argument types too much because they're actually quite common sense. And as you go along, you get used to them. So I'm just going to go to the next step. I'm going to use my mouse wheel to make this slightly bigger. If you've got a touch screen, you can do that with your fingers. And here's the first step. You've already seen this. And it connects to a second step.
Okay, and I notice there's another purple box.
Yeah, this is just a different type of argument. This is a definition argument. This argument works because it's using this statement here, this premise, as a definition. So an act of CSR, so corporate social responsibility, is only genuine if not obliged by law or contractual duty to the owner, and using that to derive this conclusion that the business manager is only really doing CSR if he or she acts against the owner's wishes, which is quite a startling conclusion to come to.
It is. I'm quite shocked by that. And there are some brains on the edge of those two blue boxes.
Yeah, these are our brain boxes. These give more information. So the focus of the app is on argument. The first thing you see is the structure of the argument. But very often you need some facts or some case studies or whatever, extra information. So if you click on one of these, you get a little knowledge box turn up.
Great.
So in this case, this is an interesting one because you get the statement here and then some more comments about it. If you look up Friedman's article, he doesn't actually mention this, but it does seem to be what he needs. So this is a reconstructed premise. It's one that we put in to make the argument work.
And Julian, can you just remind me what a premise is?
A premise, all of these boxes here that have the coloured outline, the blue outline, are statements. So they're sentences that could be true or false. And that's true of the whole diagram. But the role that they play in a step of the argument is if they are the things you're coming from, they're premises, and if they're the things you're going to, they're the conclusion. So this second step of the argument here has these two premises, and you can see the direction in which the arrows go, and it moves to this conclusion. So you always know which way the logic is running.
Yeah. And so
shall I go on to the next step?
Yes, please.
Okay. So now this is a side argument. So Friedman actually in his paper, he gives some examples of what we would normally consider to be corporate social responsibility. Mm-hmm. So these are the examples. Excuse me. If you click on the brain box, in these cases, you get a quote. These are quotes straight from the paper. So if you want to put quotes in an essay or something, that's quite useful. And in each case, these are things that go above and beyond what the manager is required to do by the owner or by the law. So, for example, reducing pollution beyond what the law requires is genuine CSR. And we go through this generalization argument step. And this is a secondary argument to come to the conclusion, this rather surprising statement that we had before. Great. I'm interested to see the next slide. Right. So we go back to the main argument here. This is a very simple step. So we're just going from the statement that we had before. So the manager only exercises genuine CSR if she acts against the owner's wishes, and using a simple entailment that the manager exercises genuine CSR if she spends money differently to how the owner would. Entailment is just things that we can see that are correct through common sense or through the way that language works. Yeah. So clearly, one type of going against the wish of the owner is spending their money how they didn't want to. So the common sense point is the manager only exercises genuine CSR if she acts against the owner's wishes. So the manager exercises genuine CSR if she spends money differently to how the owner would. And that second blue box is a common sense conclusion from the first one, which technically we're calling the entailment argument. Yeah, great. So if you know this, then common sense will tell you this, that is true as well. Great, thank you. So I'll just go to the next one. So I'll just make that a little bit bigger. And I can click and drag. I just click on the white part and hold it, and I can drag the graph wherever I like. So now we have another definition step. So that's the step we just saw before. This is another step. And Friedman actually helps himself to this definition. Taxation is spending people's money differently to how they would choose. I find that a really interesting definition of taxation, but it does actually ring true. What do you think? I was quite shocked when I read that, but then when I thought about it, it makes sense. Yeah, it kind of does make sense. I think you could probably argue about that quite a lot, but anyway, that's what's in his paper. That's part of his argument. So using that as a definition of taxation, that means that CSR, as long as it's genuine, is a tax imposed by the manager on the owner. Which is a very controversial thing to say. Yes, but I mean, this is exactly his point, is that if a manager does things that is not required or wanted by the owner or by the law, they're effectively taxing the owner in order to achieve some other objective, some kind of social improvement.
Would the manager sack them? No, would the boss, the owner, sack them?
Yeah, the owner sack them. Well, he actually makes that point in the paper that surely you should be sacked for that. But at the time he was writing, lots of people were writing that this was the right thing to do for managers.
So he was quite independent-minded.
Oh, definitely. He's he's certainly very eminent economist, and he took a lot of, as I said before, he took a lot of the business community with him.
Excellent. And the next slide.
Right. This is the last step of the main argument.
Yeah.
So we've arrived at taxation is imposed is a tax, basically. Sorry, CSR is a tax. And the other premise you need here is taxation it's only legitimate if government does it.
Yeah, get that.
Yeah, which kind of makes sense. There's quite a lot in the paper on this of we elect politicians in order to decide taxation.
Yeah.
And being taxed, but just by somebody's whim is not right. And so this, I think, is quite a fair point. That if this is true, I think this is definitely true. So you come out that CSR, if it's really CSR, is wrong. So corporate social responsibility is wrong. And just over here, the assistant is making an extra comment here. Friedman goes further. He actually claims that corporate social responsibility is socialism, which he was very much against.
Wow. So he's quite radical. And yet the way the argument's set out here, it's very clear to understand, even if we might disagree with it.
Yes, that's the point. You may vehemently disagree with this, and lots of people do. But if you're going to criticize it, you need to understand how it works. And the software is actually built to let you change it. Yeah. We'll come to that in a future lesson, but the software enables you to do that.
So by our students understanding the different steps of an argument that they really disagree with, then it's actually easier for them to reason why that argument is wrong.
Yeah, so we'll come to that when we come to look at editing the graph. So this diagram, I forgot to say, it's called an argument graph. And we have an edit program that allows the student to change things. And we'll go through that later.
That sounds exciting.
Right. So what I'm going to do is go on here. This is basically Friedman's argument finished at this point. But what I've added on top is a defense of part of it. So this, if you remember, this statement here was perhaps the most surprising one. And yes, we've looked at that before. This is the crux of the argument. This is what makes the argument really work. And it's not very good philosophical style to just pluck it out of the air. And we have done this because Friedman doesn't he doesn't state this point in his argument. He seems to be assuming it. Mm. So what we've tried to do here is reconstruct how you would defend this.
Yeah.
So, and we're going to use Kant, Immanuel Kant's ethical theory for this.
Great, I like Kant.
Yeah, so do I actually. So the next step, we're going to spend 3 steps looking at how you would defend this premise by using Kant. So you could tell us a lot about Kantian ethics, couldn't you?
I could indeed, yes.
But what we've done here is there's a little introduction here that Kant's this assumption that Friedman has made that seems to be a Kantian idea, So this purple box here, we call a scenario, and it's there to give context to the argument. So everything inside the box is going to be in the world of Kantian ethics. So I'm going to click on the eye. That gives you the information what the scenario is.
Yeah.
And does this look familiar to you?
Thankfully, it does. Yeah.
That's good. So Kant has this idea that things that only have moral worth if they're done for the sake of duty. So if duty was sufficient motivation to do them. And he has a very famous example of a shopkeeper who doesn't cheat his customers. He doesn't overcharge them. But the reason he does it, the reason he doesn't overcharge them is because he's worried about his business reputation, not because it's the right thing to do. And in that case, Kant says his action, although it's the right thing to do, has no moral value.
Yeah.
And this is very central to Kantian thinking. So I've built that in here. I mean, this premise essentially says that's a statement of Kantian theory. And here is what seems to be behind Friedman's thinking. So either corporate social responsibility has moral worth, or it is just window dressing.
And window dressing is just another way of saying that the company's being hypocritical to make profit because it's a popular thing to do.
Yeah, this is a phrase that gets used in the literature. Interestingly, I've seen it in exam questions.
Yeah.
It's definitely come up. So I've put a little brain box here to say that. So window dressing, a phrase frequently used, and it's for hypocritical use of CSR. So actions that further the business interests, really. So, for example, improving safety for workers, but out of fear for being fined, rather than out of concern for the workers. So you take these two and use clearly this is a definition. It means that genuine corporate social responsibility, and now we see what the word genuine really means. It means genuine rather than window dressing. Has to be done for the sake of duty.
So the only reason you're doing that action is because it's the right action to do, and not because you get anything out of it financially or in any other way.
Exactly. That's the core of Kantian ethics. And if I go to the next step, we can put a little bit more detail on that. So now, when you're talking CSR, what moral duty are you talking about? Well, you're talking about improving society in some way. So making society better. So we simply get from these two to genuine corporate social responsibility must be done for the sake of improving society.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we put one more step on this argument, and we arrive where we want to. So I'll just put it up here so it's big enough. So genuine CSR must be done for the sake of improving society. And then I'm using an either-or argument. So either it's done to help society, or it's done because the owner requires it or the law requires it. And if it's done for this reason, then it's not done for the other reason. That's how either-or arguments work. So therefore, that means it's not being done as a contractual duty to the owner or because of the law. And that's exactly the premise we needed to make Friedman's argument work.
Yeah.
So we can get it out of this Kantian ethical background. And I think it would be reasonable to, if you're writing an essay on corporate social responsibility, to try and use Kant to support Friedman's argument.
interesting. And would anybody dispute Friedman's definition of CSR?
Yes, plenty would. In fact, I think in contemporary business schools, you'd find most people not taking it at face value, and some are very, very against it. There's a lot that can be said. I haven't taken the lesson beyond there, but what we can do, if I go just to the last step here, here we go. Here is the whole graph, everything that you've seen. So this is the main argument. Whoops. This is the examples that we had look at of corporate social responsibility. And this is the Kantian part. And you can zoom in and look at any part of it. You'll always see the whole graph on the last stage of a lesson. And it's after that that you can edit the graph and add more into it. So I haven't added any more steps because I thought this lesson was long enough already. But you could certainly add more steps that were undermining parts of the argument.
Excellent. So, Julian, would it be fair to say it's a bit like a big flow diagram? And when it gets put all together there, it looks quite intense, but you can just pop your cursor into the white area and expand it and get it bigger.
Exactly. So the argument graph, this is what it looks like all in one go. And it's quite complex, but that's at the end of the lesson. The point of the lesson is to take you through it step by step so you understand it. And then when you start to modify it, you go from here, from the whole thing, and you can modify any part of it.
Great. So thank you for this first introduction to visual learning in philosophy. Where would you recommend our students go next?
Well, next, I think we're going to look at one of the philosophical arguments about the existence of God from William Paley. I think that will be the next one that we do.
Excellent. Julian, thank you very much.
Okay, bye. See you soon.